There's no doubt that the Secret Service has faced plenty of criticism after 2 assassination attempts on President-elect Donald Trump during the campaign. The first was in July at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The second in September at the Trump International Golf Club in Florida. These security lapses were likely due to long-running problems. New reporting from the Washington Post has found the number of Secret Service members with 5 years of experience or less makes up nearly 30% of the agency, while in 2015 they made up only 13%.
10 years ago, a White House-commissioned investigation into the Secret Service suggested that the best agents should spend at least 25% of their time training on the job. But the Washington Post found that agents are training only 3 to 7% of the time. The investigation also recommended appointing an outsider to lead the Secret Service. All 3 presidents since then, Presidents Obama, Trump, and Biden, ultimately ignored this, or at least didn't act on that recommendation. Trump did at first choose an outsider during his term, but he fired him in 2019.
Anthony Guglielmini, a Secret Service spokesperson, said that a lack of resources and funding prevented the agency from adopting all the recommendations. He cited a lack of resources and of funding. And Max Stier, the president of a nonprofit group called Partnership for Public Service, which focuses on improving management of the federal government, has told the Post that Secret Service members have low morale and are burned out from the lack of reforms and reinforcements. Stier says many agents have ranked the Secret Service as the worst place to work in the federal government. Former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino took to X, reacting to this report, and wrote, "Fix this or someone is going to get killed." Yes, the numerous failures of the Secret Service on full display, particularly with the Butler, Pennsylvania attempt on Trump's life, in which he was actually wounded by gunfire. Another person was killed, and I think a third person seriously injured, by a gunman on a rooftop that should have been in the secure perimeter. If that, they said, well, that was outside the perimeter. But if it's easy for an amateur to get off such a shot to hit the president from that distance, then you have to have that be part of the secure perimeter. They were themselves on a roof, so the argument that you couldn't be on that roof made no sense. The people who did take out the shooter, he was spotted by bystanders. He was engaged with by local police, but that message was not transmitted to the detail fast enough. There just seemed to be a tremendous lack of acting with sufficient vigor, given the knowledge they had of a suspicious person on a roof.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think anyone with any basic knowledge of security would see it as a major failure that the shooter in the Butler, Pennsylvania instance had a clear line of sight to the President of the United States speaking in the open air. It just seems like that shouldn't happen.
Yes.
The Washington Post report that we're referring to links that to some degree to these failures of the Secret Service or vulnerabilities within the Secret Service, because that report notes that the person in charge of planning for the Secret Service would typically be expected to have at least 7 years of experience overall. The person who did it in this instance had 4 years of experience. Now, the rebuttal to that would be you shouldn't need all that much experience to know that that situation wasn't secure. But nonetheless, it seems to be this point through which we can sort of extrapolate that there are these other failures to do with a move toward less experienced agents, people leaving the agency. Something I didn't know until I read the Washington Post report was at one time, recently, the Secret Service was offering $25,000 retention bonuses to people who wouldn't leave because so many people were leaving. So if you just hung around, you'd get 25 grand. That does suggest a pretty serious morale problem. It's not necessarily a funding problem. Funding for the Secret Service, according to the Post, has risen from $2.3 billion in 2017 to $3.1 billion now. So that's a significant increase. They do point out, to be fair, that the number of Secret Service details has expanded quite significantly.
Sure, as it becomes more necessary to protect a greater number of people. I remember the RFK Jr.'s lack of receiving Secret Service protection was something he frequently complained about, to my mind not without some cause, given how high profile an individual he was.
Well, and the family, the tragic family history, yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah. So the determination not to do that seemed suspicious to me, although if they're dealing with a finite pool of resources and can't even guarantee the actual presence. And then it was so at his golf course that they weren't checking that a little bit more, or that somebody could be there in the bushes, knowing from the cell phone signal that there's someone hiding in the bushes for hours and hours and hours. He was there. It seems very worrisome, but I don't know, maybe we're entering a new modern era where it's going to be harder and harder to protect important people from threats.
I think that's possibly the case. I mean, certainly the level of hostility in our politics now does seem to me to create an increased threat of actual attacks, unfortunately. Sure. Having said that, I mean, these problems with the Secret Service have been going on at least a decade. In reading the Post story, I was reminded of how embarrassing some of the failures were during the Obama era, where a guy literally jumped the fence at the White House and went in the front door of the building, of the White House itself, and eventually was apprehended, but there were all sorts of weird failures there, including a Secret Service agent who was armed but just didn't know what to do because he didn't know, if he was permitted to shoot within the White House itself. All of these things are part of this picture where it seems a very troubled agency. Obviously, the director did resign following the Butler assassination attempt, Kimberly Cheadle. So it's a very worrisome picture.
Right, and the extent to which this corresponds to heated rhetoric or a very divided times in our politics is, not even totally completely clear. We had two presidents actually assassinated in 1870 and 1900, political violence all across all of Europe, with numerous heads of states assassinated, eventually leading to World War I. That was not a time of incredible, unique partisan political difference, and the 60s and 70s saw an extreme amount of ideologically motivated violence, and I don't know if you want to say that was a more incendiary time than now. The 60s certainly, maybe not so much the 70s.
No, and also I wonder, without getting too deep into the weeds of that, 63 was JFK, and I don't think at that stage the sort of tumult of the 60s was really in full effect in the same way. There were all sorts of theories, and it's one of the happenings in American history that I think the phrase conspiracy theory is wrongly applied to. A majority of Americans have never believed that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in that instance. But nevertheless, it wasn't. I mean, I think you could make the argument in say, 68 when RFK
and MLK
were killed, that it was more a product of a very inflammatory time.
Well, we will continue to monitor that. No doubt the Secret Service has a lot of questions to answer about recent failures. Still to come, more on Rising Today. Please stay with us.